and privilege and recognition of guests. The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and welcome to my colleagues back for another day of important deliberations here in the Legislative Assembly, all of those who are tuned in at home, and to our friends in the media who help provide the information streams all along. I wanted to begin, Mr. Speaker, by congratulating my friend Goops Wooldridge, Mr. Speaker, who was re-elected to the Hockey Canada Board of Directors recently. Goops has over 50 years of dedication, Mr. Speaker, to amateur hockey and PEI in the region. An all-around good person, Mr. Speaker, good community person. Up until COVID, it was hard to wander into a rink anywhere in Prince Edward Island without seeing Goops, Mr. Speaker. And I was thinking as I was writing this that I remember, Mr. Speaker, the first time I met Goops, it was the fall of 1984. I was the stick boy for the Eastern Huskies in the Junior League, and Goops was the trainer and equipment manager for the Sherwood Parkdale Metros, Mr. Speaker. And it's been a long journey since then, but glad to see he's still involved in amateur hockey in the region and across the country. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Mental Health Association has launched their annual White Cross Christmas gift campaign. It's an island-wide campaign that in the past has provided over 900 gifts that are distributed to those in need across Prince Edward Island. It used to be an annual donation of tangible gifts along with monetary donations, Mr. Speaker, but due to the realities of COVID, the CMHA is asking for monetary donations this year, Mr. Speaker, so I would encourage all Islanders to contact the Canadian Mental Health Association's PEI branch, either through their website or to call in to support this very worthwhile cause. Mr. Speaker, often in the morning, if I have time, I stop in at Timothy's Coffee Shop in Charlottetown to get my morning coffee, and often run into Brian Gillis for a spirited chat of all things political and otherwise. Among other duties, Brian is a member of the Board of Directors for Habitat for Humanity here in PEI. And in one of our most recent chats, he was leaving to go negotiate a contract for a new location for their restore, Mr. Speaker. They have outgrown their location on Mount Edward Road, and it must have been successful. I was reading in the media that they will be relocating to the former Sears store just up the road in early January. So congratulations to Brian and all of those who assist in that important endeavour. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I think I speak for all Islanders when I say I was pleased to see PEI's Bill Campbell recognized as an extraordinary Canadian in the recent release of Peter Mansbridge's new book on extraordinary Canadians called Heart of Our Nation, Mr. Speaker. We all know Bill in this province is a champion for many things, but affordable housing being at the top, and of course the president and founder of the King Square Affordable Housing Cooperative, Mr. Speaker. So thanks to Bill for all he's done, and congratulations on a much deserved recognition. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and as I often do, I'll pick up on what the Premier said and pass on my own congratulations to Bill for that really high honour. I heard Peter Mansbridge interviewed just yesterday on the radio, and he picked Bill out as one of the highlights of the 17, I think, Canadians included in that book, so congratulations to you, Bill. On a more sombre note, I want to pass on my condolences to the family of Derek Bell, who tragically died in Korea over the weekend. So to Scott and Brenda and his family, I pass on the condolences of my caucus in this House. I know it was a sudden death, and I know Derek was well loved here on the island and obviously well loved in his new home in Asia. I want to congratulate the government on being the most improved province in the Efficiency Canada scorecard that came out early this morning. While we're still number 5 out of 10 provinces, we got the call as the most improved province. This is year 2 of the scorecard that Efficiency Canada produces. And I think that's something to be very proud of. So I want to thank government, Efficiency PEI specifically, and the other departments who are working to make this province as green as it possibly can be and to reduce our carbon footprint, and to receive that national recognition, I think, is very important. A quick shout out to the Car Life Museum that I drive by every day on my way into work. It's been there since, oh my gosh, it's been there 54 years, so I can do the math on that. I can't do the math on that as I stand here. But Shirlene McKay, who ran it with her husband Kevin, who tragically died earlier this year in April, just shy of his 65th birthday. Charlene is hoping to reopen that with the help of her children, Christy and Greg, next summer, should circumstances allow. But it's just a wonderful place to visit, and a real island icon that's been there, again, over half a century. And it always brings a smile to my face as I drive by there and look at the various bits and bobs that are outside, knowing all of the great machines that are inside as well. And finally, I paid a visit also to Brookvale, to the mountain bike trails there over the weekend. Had a visit with a friend of many people in this house, Cynthia King, who just set up a little outdoor cafe there, Bits and Bikes it's called. And it's a great spot, my goodness. The trails there are world class. Cynthia, of course, is a great ambassador, and she'd be happy to give you a hot chocolate or a coffee, or now she can even give you a beer if you're so inclined. I was there on Sunday. It was a pretty chilly day, Mr. Speaker, but the parking lot was jammed. And it was great to see so many islanders and plates from out of province as well enjoying the great facilities that we have there in Brookvale. So good on everybody who has been a real promoter of that place as a mountain bike destination, and they're doing a fantastic job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly great to be back here doing the people's business in this Legislative Assembly. I'd also like to congratulate Bill Campbell on his recognition and congratulate the government on your national recognition. And also, while I'm congratulating people, I have a lady in my district by the name of Sophie LaFrance. She was recently presented with the Quilt of Valor on a week ago today. Sophie has a distinguished military career. She served in Afghanistan, and this is a fitting tribute to someone who dedicated her life to our country, and for that we are grateful. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this opportunity to briefly address some of the news we received earlier today, significantly on the matter of mandatory masks. This is something many members of this House have been calling for, so we are pleased to see it implemented. The science undoubtedly indicates that masks can reduce the possible spread of COVID-19. In many cases, the private sector has already taken a lead on this. Masks allow our businesses to operate under safe conditions. They ensure recreational activities can proceed under precautions, and they help facilitate a degree of normalcy in our everyday lives. In light of the rising cases around the country, we are pleased to see this directive be implemented. Hopefully, this will give Islanders a degree of comfort as they go about their daily lives. Masks do not only protect you from the virus, but they also protect your families, friends, and communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome everyone here today and everyone that's watching online. I don't usually get up and do greetings. I kind of stay away from it, but I thought it was probably important today, the first day back in the legislature, and the Leader of the Opposition just brought this up earlier, but to send my condolences to Scott and Brenda Bell, who are constituents of mine and very big supporters of mine. They had lawn signs on both sides of the end of their driveway for me. So, and their son Derek really was, I think, Scott said it best in the CBC News article. If there were 100 people in a room, in 5 minutes he would know them all, and I think that's very true. Anytime I ever talk to Derek, or as Scott called him, a junior, and as he's known as, just full of life. It was really infectious for anyone that was around him. And I also know, I've known Scott since I was 12. He was the one, when I started refereeing hockey, actually. He was the referee-in-chief in Montague Minor Hockey for years, I think even for Hockey PEI for a number of years back in the 90s. And Scott was someone who always, and still does, looks out for me, was a mentor for me. I would even consider him like a father, really. So I just really wanted to pass along my condolences to Scott and Brenda. I know they're devastated, and just, to let them know that, we love them, I love them, the community loves them, so sincere condolences to them. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd certainly like to welcome everyone tuning in today on Eastlink or online to the proceedings. Mr. Speaker, in particular, I'd like to send out a hello to my very good friend Danny Harris, who is a regular viewer, as well as my mother-in-law Doreen. Mr. Speaker, I had the occasion of going to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital yesterday with my mother, and I just want to thank the tremendous healthcare workers that provided incredible compassionate care to my mom for the services that she required. And just in closing, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Premier spoke about it last Friday. The Stratford Area Food Drive took place this past Saturday. It was a little different because of COVID. There was 5 drop-off locations instead of door-to-door collection. But Mr. Speaker, one thing that didn't change was we still did collection at all the apartment buildings. I've been doing that, I think, probably for close to 10 years now. And I just am amazed continually, every year, year after year, the generosity of the people of Stratford. This year exceeded all expectations, exceeded all levels of donations from previous years, to the point, Mr. Speaker, where my helper, my lovely wife, Cece, wasn't able to come into the food bank to do the drop-off with me because I had to drop her off at home before I finished the buildings, because her seat in my vehicle was filled with food as well. So the back of my truck, the back seat, and the passenger's seat in my truck was completely full. So thank you very much to all residents of Stratford for your incredible generosity. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a privilege to be back here in the legislature for another week. Certainly want to send a shout out to all of the great people in West Prince, certainly in District 26, who may be tuned in and watching. The Premier and the Leader of the Opposition both passed on their congratulations to Mr. Bill Campbell, and I certainly want to echo those comments. It is, without a doubt, it's a privilege to be able to represent the people of Prince Edward Island in this legislature. But one of the additional honors that comes with that privilege is to be able to meet some great people right from one tip of this island to the other. And Bill Campbell, certainly before I was elected, I did not know Bill at all, but I have had the pleasure of meeting Bill, getting to know him, and can just state unequivocally what a great person, what a great community person, and volunteer and advocate for the most vulnerable on this island that Bill has been and continues to be. And Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had the pleasure to drop in, have a visit, have a great chat with a constituent of the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, with Mr. Don McCachran in Kensington. And Don is and continues to be a great community volunteer. He is a member on the PEI Community Health Engagement Committee, board member of the Kensington Co-op, has served as the chair of the board of directors of the Upper Room Hospitality Ministry. Now, Don, he had been as well a member of the Poverty Reduction Council. Don, due to health reasons, recently had to step down from the council. But again, it was great to drop in, have that talk with Don, and to present him with a certificate of appreciation. So I just want to state here publicly my congrats, my thanks to Don for all of the years that he has dedicated to the people of Prince Edward Island, and certainly to the people in the greater Kensington area. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. It's great to be back in the House for our second week. Looking forward to it. And hello to everyone watching from District 18 Rustow-Co-Emerald. I just wanted to send condolences to my good friend Kevin Clory and his family. His uncle, John Dockendorf, passed away, and he was a welder at the shipyard in Georgetown, and I believe I even worked with the Premier's father a bit. So I just want to send my condolences to him. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and welcome everybody back for another week at the legislature. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Just want to send a couple of notes of condolences. Ryan Kelly from Cardigan passed away recently. Ryan was 30 years old. He had battled his second bout of cancer. Ryan comes from a very big family in Cardigan and a very tight-knit community that it is. Ryan would be a connoisseur of everything Cardigan and knew all the news of what was happening around Cardigan, and he used to sell me chickens that he raised as well. He was well-loved and probably one of the kindest souls one would find, so Cardigan definitely lost a special person with Ryan. Send condolences to his mom and dad, Roger and Pauline, his brother Aaron. And to touch on a couple, it's been mentioned a couple times here already, but the passing of Derek Bell. Derek was a friend of mine. I grew up with Derek, and much like the member from Montague-Kilmuir, his father Scott got me into refereeing when I was only young. I was probably 11 or 12, as was Derek. He was in and around, he was a year older than me. A bunch of us all started together, myself and Derek and Jamie Matheson and Andrew McDonald. We used to have a lot of fun around the rink refereeing hockey. We would go on Saturday mornings at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'd be at the rink all day. And I remember Scott used to, this is back before they paid referees anything, so we were just doing it because we loved the game. And Scott used to buy you French fries to get you to stay for one more game. One more game, bud. I'll buy you fries. One more game, and I'll buy you fries, bud. And certainly, they're a much beloved family in the Montague area and in the hockey community as well. So I spoke with Scott, and I shared some stories. And one of the striking things I found was every time I ran into Derek, he had been in Korea for a number of years, but he always made it home a couple times a year, and usually run into him once a year somewhere at a hockey game or at a bar or at an event. And Derek loved people, and he knew everybody in the room, in every room that you were in. It didn't matter where it was. And I came to find after his passing, following along on Facebook, that he had that effect all over the world. He had people posting from New Zealand, all across Canada, all over Korea, into China. He certainly left his mark everywhere that he went. And one of the things that I think linked together what everybody had said about Derek over the weekend on Facebook was he lived life to the fullest. And he died scuba diving in an island off of Korea. He died doing what he loved. He died living life. So he'll be sadly missed by a lot of people. Kinder soul you couldn't meet. I never heard anybody say a bad thing about Derek Bell. So condolences to his family. He certainly will be missed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Nobody else? Did I miss anybody? Next on the orders is statements by members. The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID has presented the world with challenges that have exasperated an existing reality faced by many. Before COVID, while jobs were still relatively secure as compared to now, many were struggling to pay their bills. They often found themselves between a rock and a hard place, having to make impossible decisions each month. The struggle is often referred to as trying to keep the lights on. It often results in having to make a choice between eating or having heat and light, medicine or being warm, and on and on. Sadly, energy poverty is something that is more prevalent in Atlantic Canada than elsewhere in Canada. We just had an Efficiency Canada report come out saying that we're doing more than any other jurisdiction in Canada. However, this wicked problem still remains. What we have done is not enough. We have to do more to address the issue. Lowering the cost of power to most islanders can have a beneficial impact across many issues that at first glance may seem unrelated. For example, worrying about keeping the lights on can add to the stress that we feel about the state of the world around us, and thereby decreasing our mental health and resilience. Another example of how lowering the cost of power to islanders can help is the reality that it can improve our health outcomes. If islanders do not have to choose between paying for medications they need for their health or staying warm, it would reduce the strain on our already overworked healthcare system. PEI has the ability to take control of its energy future. In the process, we can also pull all islanders out of energy poverty while pushing hard towards the government's new goals of net zero energy consumption by 2030. If we do this right, we can put islanders on a firmer foundation and a path to security, dignity, and health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to rise in this House and affirm my support of the Mi'kmaq right to a moderate livelihood fishery. It's very easy to stand and pledge support on comfortable things like Treaty Day and Indigenous Culture Month without digging too deeply into what either of those things mean. When we celebrate Treaty Day, we need to remember that those peace and friendship treaties are the legal authority that affirms, among other things, the Mi'kmaq constitutional right to fish for a moderate livelihood. This has already been settled. It was affirmed in the original treaties, reaffirmed by the Canadian Constitution, and again affirmed twice at the Supreme Court level. The real question is, how steadfast are we to reconciliation when it gets hard? My family is Maliseet, and I remember the Marshall decision. I was a teenager, and I remember visiting my family in New Brunswick and listening to my aunts and uncles talking in the evening about the violence that was erupting. 21 years later, not a lot has changed. We witnessed violence and racism again this past summer when Mi'kmaq began exercising their treaty and constitutional rights. We saw Mi'kmaq fishing gear, equipment, and processing facilities destroyed in the name of conservation. It is not conservation to steal legally caught lobster and leave them to die on a wharf. It does not help to have our federal representatives muddying these waters. Those same federal representatives, Mr. Speaker, had 2 decades to work nation to nation on developing a framework to move this issue forward. The inaction and lip service of successive governments has exasperated this situation. Delay, misrepresentation, and misinformation can continue no longer. We will most certainly see moderate livelihood fisheries here on PEI, and I urge the provincial government to take a proactive stance on this. In the coming weeks and months, I hope the government, led by the Minister of Fisheries and the Premier as Minister responsible for Indigenous relations, will ensure a robust education campaign to debunk myths surrounding this legal right. I hope government will build understanding and support in its policies and in our province. Equally important is for government to be unequivocal in communicating that violence will not be tolerated. Treaty rights exist and pre-exist rules and regulations provided by Her Majesty's government to extend a privilege to settlers who wish to fish also. Our treaty rights must be upheld. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I'd like to recognize someone, if I could, that I missed earlier, and it's somebody pretty important. My oldest son is home recovering from surgery he had yesterday, and I wish him a speedy recovery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it's never easy to put one's name forward to run for public office. It requires jumping through hoops, giving up your time and energy, and submitting to public scrutiny. These are daunting demands by even the most trained and practiced politicians' political standards. In a recently passed by-election, Mr. Zach Murphy, a 29-year-old Charlottetown resident, decided to stand for election as a Liberal. And we can all agree Island politics needs more people like Zach to put up the sword and enter the ring. After much deliberation, Mr. Murphy made the decision to run for the third party. No easy task at the best of times. And even though he was not a successful candidate, he showed us all that political campaigns can be fun as well as professional, that politicians can be jovial while also working to hold others accountable for their actions and their inactions. That is, in fact, possibly to have fun doing your work while also champion serious issues that matter to Islanders and his constituents. Mr. Speaker, when Mr. Murphy made his decision to run, he put a team of young professionals together and gave it everything he had. He promised at the outset not to shy away from the big issues, to pressure government to talk about the challenges facing District 10. He wanted to turn this by-election into a referendum on the issues, not a popularity contest. And while Mr. Murphy was not successful in his first foray into politics, he brought issues like access to mental health and addiction services, politicizing of schools and infrastructure projects, and affordability and cost of living to the forefront. One can argue that he even had this provincial government reacting and taking note of his campaign in the final weeks, no short order for a first-time candidate. Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude by thanking all of the candidates who put their names forward in the most recently by-election, and I would like to single out Zach Murphy once more. I hope that Island politics have not seen the last of you. Zach, your brand of politics is needed now more than ever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as notice. The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On November 13th, the Honourable Member for Charlottetown Belvedere asked me questions pertaining to the Seniors Housing Plan. The Auditor General completed a value for money audit of the Seniors Housing Program in 2016 and included 10 recommendations in the Auditor General's report released in 2017. One of the recommendations in the report was the Housing Services Division should prepare a long-term plan to address the current and expected future demand for low-income seniors housing. In July 2018, the government released the Housing Action Plan for Prince Edward Island 2018 to 2023. The current government has continued to build on that work, implementing measures to address the realities of the current housing situation in Prince Edward Island. In fall 2019, Social Development and Housing assessed that the planning recommendation was complete when providing a status update to the Auditor General. The Auditor General agreed, and it was publicly documented in the Auditor General's 2019 report released in March of 2020. I also committed to bring back information regarding the number of seniors housing units and their occupancy rates. Mr. Speaker, I want to confirm that the PEI Housing Corporation owns 1,122 units for seniors. There are minimal vacancies and units turn over within the month, unless substantial renovations are required for the next tenant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No others? For our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I know I'm not alone in saying that I was deeply disappointed in the choices that our government made regarding mental health and addiction supports last spring. At the beginning of the pandemic, tough choices indeed had to be made to make room for potential COVID patients in our hospitals. And thankfully, no individual, of course, on Prince Edward Island has yet been hospitalised with COVID at this time. But many wonder why almost all acute mental health and addiction supports were removed from the QEH as a first step. No other disease or illness saw that kind of blatant disregard. A question to the Minister of Health and Wellness. What made you decide that patients with mental health and addiction were the lowest priority?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Honourable Member for that very important question. There could be nothing further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. In fact, our government, the healthcare system, rallied to enhance supports for individuals experiencing mental health illness and addictions. Mr. Speaker, a few examples were the psychiatric urgent care clinics that we introduced here on PEI, both at the Hillsborough Hospital and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Mr. Speaker, we brought many innovations into play as well, Mr. Speaker, with regards to access to psychiatry services. That's just to name two examples. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I mean, not only have Islanders suffered greatly because of the choices that were made by this minister and his department, but that choice also fueled the stigma around mental health and addictions. They sent the message that treatment was unnecessary, that treatment was not a priority, that it could indeed be considered optional. Unfortunately, the damage that your choices have caused cannot be undone, but what you can do is change the choices that you make going forward. Question to the same minister. Do you commit to get Unit 9 back to full capacity by the end of 2020 and ensure that it and the transition unit will not be the first to close in the event of a second wave here on Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are very much on track to having Unit 9 at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital fully back into play with regards to care for psychiatric patients that require in hospital services. Mr. Speaker, as far as speaking to what may happen during the next wave of COVID, Mr. Speaker, I can't guarantee anything. We have no idea what the second wave could look like potentially, how impactful it could be on our healthcare system. So I, again, will work closely with the clinicians and the healthcare professionals, such as Dr. Heather Morrison, such as Dr. Heather Kaiser, to make these decisions jointly so that we can make sure that we have all the services in place to look after people, whether they have a mental health issue or whether they're hospitalized due to COVID. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A COVID-19 economic recovery will only happen if women are able to fully participate. As late as this summer, we weren't even tracking information on how many women and women-led businesses were accessing government supports. We had child care centres asking women if they were able to work from home before they could access a spot, and yet we continue to hear government say that they are using a gender lens. This feels like another thing this government has announced that it hasn't actually started. Question to the minister responsible for the status of women. Since you continue to tell us that you're using a gender lens, will you table the accountability framework that you've developed, as well as information on the training and tools that you've delivered, as well as the dates?
The honourable minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to acknowledge all the women and families out there. This certainly has been extenuating circumstances and an extremely challenging time for women, especially as we all know they have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Certainly, I've been in an abundance, as you can well imagine, an abundance of discussions with women's groups across the island, and I'm really proud of the efforts that my fellow colleague, Minister of Tourism and Economic Recovery or Growth, had this summer. We had engaged with 50 stakeholders, and through that we implemented a workforce integration fund, that we are extremely proud of, and I encourage women's group to participate in that as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, that's great storytelling, but it's not a whole lot of substance. So if you want to have a look on the Status of Women Canada's website, you will see what a gender-based analysis lens actually is, and it will be as apparent to you as it is to the rest of us that you're not using it. The women in this province deserve a plan, and the province as a whole deserves to know what our plan is going to be for economic recovery. Question to the Premier. What part of the economic action plan put forward by the Partnership for Growth can we expect to see government acting on?
The honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question and for bringing light to this very important issue that I think we're all trying to navigate our way through. As the minister articulated quite well, we are working, I would say, diligently to try to make the best of a situation that, quite frankly, we haven't done a good job of managing leading up to COVID, Mr. Speaker. As part of the conversations we've had on the Economic Recovery and Growth Council, for example, Mr. Speaker, there's been a tremendous amount of input from all across Prince Edward Island in terms of not just putting the gender lens on it from a perspective of, as the honourable member quite frankly says, from window dressing, but to actually dive in and to make a concrete difference. I think what the minister talked about in her conversations with the Minister of Economic Growth, we sit around the cabinet table, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what we want. We want to be able to talk about what are the hard and fast solutions we can put forward to these challenges. It's no short, Mr. Speaker, in government in 18 and a half months or whatever it has been, there's no shortage of challenges, Mr. Speaker, and what we've tried to encourage in our conversations across the board is, what are the solutions? How can we work toward the solutions? We know what the challenges are. Let's work together on the solutions, Mr. Speaker, and I think we're making some significant progress, and I thank the Minister for what she's been able to do so far.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A GBA lens doesn't just benefit women. It benefits all sorts of intersectionalities, and it's incredibly important, but it's also an actual tool. It's a framework. It's not just something you can say you're doing. If you want to look on the Status of Women Canada's website, you'll see how to actually develop that. But it would be incredibly important for this province for us to have a plan, an economic plan moving forward, not just for women, but for everyone. So I'm going to repeat my question. What parts of the economic action plan put forward by the Partnership for Growth can we expect to see the province acting on?
The honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly with the question and the comments by the honourable member. I think that what we're trying to do with our Economic Growth Council and our Council for Recovery, Mr. Speaker, is to find a way through this difficult time and not just get on the path to normal, Mr. Speaker, but to create a new opportunity for normal, Mr. Speaker, and chase those new opportunities to actually lift this province from where it is up to a higher level, Mr. Speaker. And you're exactly right. It doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter anything, Mr. Speaker. All Islanders deserve to be lifted up, Mr. Speaker, to be the best that we can be. That's what we're trying to do every day, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we have upwards of 100 Islanders making contributions to our Economic Growth and Recovery Council, Mr. Speaker, and some of the ideas put forward there I think are revolutionary, Mr. Speaker, and the next step now is to put the words to action, Mr. Speaker, and I'm excited about that. Thank you.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree that we need a plan, and I see all kinds of piecemeal plans coming together, but I don't see a cohesive plan. I didn't hear an answer on what parts of the Economic Action Plan put forward by the Partnership for Growth you're particularly interested in, so I'm going to move on to another one. We have a number of plans moving forward. There's also an Economic Recovery Plan that's been put forward for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women. Question to the Minister responsible for the status of women. Which parts of that Economic Recovery Plan are you championing?
The honourable minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I am so in awe at the work that the Advisory Council does, and truly and really grateful for the opportunity to have discussed with them this plan that they had put forward. I have a copy of the plan here, and certainly we broke it into all the categories. And I am proud of the efforts that the Secretariat has done. I think, you know, in looking at this and looking at the thorough analysis, we've actually addressed all of the recommendations to some degree. And as I stated on Friday, we've established a task force here across government, and this isn't something that one department's just responsible for. It's something that we're working across government, and certainly I have an abundance of information that I can table, and I'm happy to bring that back to the House. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
So that's the answer to which pieces are most important to the Minister, just for clarity there. That's very helpful. Thank you. So we've had 100 submissions come in to the Premier's Council for Recovery and Growth, and I think that's fantastic. Question to the Premier, have these submissions been summarized? And if so, what are the main themes that are emerging?
The honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's been 100. I think there's been 1,000 or more, actually, to be quite honest. And a part of the process that we've entered into has been to actually summarize that. We broke into 5 different groups, Mr. Speaker, along the way. What we found as the groups reported back, that there is a great desire in this province to see a basic income and living wage, Mr. Speaker, in this province. I think there's a tremendous desire and demand to see increased internet services across Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. I think there's a desire to tap into the innovative spirit of Islanders, Mr. Speaker. And there is a unbridled desire to succeed, Mr. Speaker. So I think that's been across all of the departments, all of the divisions that we've asked to report back. And as I say, I'm very excited, thankful for their work, Mr. Speaker, and now the greatest respect we can pay all of those who contributed, Mr. Speaker, is to start to put the actions to the words.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, we have asked so many groups and organizations to submit feedback. We've gotten excellent feedback, but a lot of it's competing. It does not all point in the same direction. And frankly, a solid economic recovery plan is the second part of our COVID response. I think it's shocking that at this point we don't yet have one cohesive plan. We have multitudes of submissions that have come forward, but no evidence of what we actually intend to do with it. Question to the Premier, when will Islanders see your vision and one clear plan on economic recovery?
The honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a little bit confused by the lead up to the question. The honourable member says there's no one way to go forward, there's conflicting views, and then she asked me to put forward what is my one way forward, Mr. Speaker. I think I've been trying to lead by example in here, Mr. Speaker. I don't have all the answers, you don't have all the answers. Collectively as a province, I think we have all the answers, and it would be naive to look at the makeup of this actual legislature from all 3 parties and to suggest that there's one way forward for this, Mr. Speaker. There are competing interests, you're absolutely right. But underneath all of those competing interests, Mr. Speaker, is a desire to see things done and to put people first, Mr. Speaker. That's why all across in the Economic Recovery and Growth Council, Mr. Speaker, all 5 different departments, whether they're looking at innovation, whether they're looking at science, whether they're looking at economic growth, all report back the need for to work towards a basic income and a livable wage, Mr. Speaker. So I think there's more that unites us than divides us, Mr. Speaker, but there's no one way forward here, and I think to suggest otherwise is incorrect. That's not the way we're going to move forward. I've been collecting information from all across PEI, Mr. Speaker, and I'm looking forward to putting that action behind the work.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, of course there are multiple plans, but as the Premier, you're going to have to pick one. You can't pick 30 plans and move forward on all of them because they have competing interests. They are not all rowing in the same direction. So while there are multitudes of ideas coming forward, Premier, you're going to have to pick a path. So at this point, government needs to set targets. Government needs to make a plan. You can't have competing plans going in the same direction. This province needs a recovery plan, and we need one now. It needs to have a lens for women. It needs to have a lens for the society that we're going to build. So I'm going to ask you again, when will we see a cohesive economic recovery plan for PEI?
The honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess by targets she means we'll set targets to be net zero by 2040, 10 years ahead of the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker. I guess by targets we set to be energy independent, Mr. Speaker, by 2030, Mr. Speaker, in this province. I know all about targets, Mr. Speaker. We're working toward it. I think you look around this legislature, Mr. Speaker, and yes, the Premier has a privileged chair, Mr. Speaker. He has the ability to do things, Mr. Speaker. But I've never once acted, Mr. Speaker, that I'm the only one that can do it, and I disagree with you that I have to make all of these decisions. We have to make them collectively, Mr. Speaker, and do what's right for Islanders.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Teachers are stressed, and that affects our kids. A recent CBC article highlighted just how stressed teachers are feeling. The minister flippantly said he's heard some concerns from teachers on this and how it relates to physical distancing in schools. But overall, he says the operational plans in island schools have been successful. I find that funny considering we currently have no community spread on PEI. Question to the minister, is your definition of success solely based on the fact that there is a lack of COVID in our schools?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member from across, I'm not sure exactly what she's getting at. I mean, I know that teachers are stressed, and I've heard that. She's heard that. It's not all teachers. It's a subset. And, you know, I'm working with the PEI Teachers Federation, and our department is. And, you know, they just had a great teachers convention at the end that just completed at the end of last week, and a lot of what happened there was focused on de-stressing teachers, and I really think that they did recharge during that time. There was also a lot of focus on being prepared if we have to go to remote learning. But Mr. Speaker, I think if you talk to parents, if you talk to students, and you've talked to the overwhelming number of teachers, they will say that back to school has been successful, our operational plans are working, and people are overwhelmingly happy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Mr. Speaker, you may want to reread your comments in that CBC article. We talked in length the last sitting about taking advantage of lowering class sizes, both for safety from COVID and for the mental health and academic success of our children. Personally, I think it's critical that we take every possible step to ensure that the mental health of our teachers, support staff, and our children are taken care of before calling this school year a success. Question to the minister, why did you not use this unprecedented opportunity to implement lower class sizes, which would have had such a positive impact on our children?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, our response to COVID and getting kids back in school has been one of the best in Canada, Mr. Speaker, and I shouldn't have to tell the member across that. We're the only jurisdiction that looked at the gaps in curriculum and addressed them and made sure they were closed. But, Mr. Speaker, we did that always with a lens on mental health and mental wellness. That's what the priority of our teachers are, and that's what teachers do day in and day out. And again, I shouldn't have to tell the member across that. And in terms of class sizes, Mr. Speaker, we worked with the CPHO. We worked within the operational plan guidelines, and we actually put as many teachers back into the system as we possibly could, and that was a lot, Mr. Speaker. And so here we are with 49 additional teachers back in the system, 11 educational assistants, a whole slew of administration support staff, new bus drivers. We supported them, and we're in a great place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and indeed that was not my question, and the reason we're seeing such great success is due to the lack of COVID in our schools. Lowering class size, yes, that is great. Lowering class size would have been hard, but if COVID has shown us anything, it's that hard things can be done very quickly when there is political will. Our class sizes are so large that social distancing is impossible, which based on the announcement this morning may mean they will be stuck wearing masks for 6 hours a day, all because the Minister of Education does not have the political will to make bold changes. Question to the Minister of Education, can you tell us exactly how you have used this unprecedented opportunity to implement bold changes in island schools to improve the mental health of students?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Mr. Speaker, I want to address this because this has not just been a priority of the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning and this government from the time of COVID. This has been a priority of this administration from the very beginning. Prior to this administration, we saw attacks on the education system. We saw teacher cuts. Now, both budgets, we've seen addition of teachers. We've seen more supports in. We've seen unprecedented agreement and moves working with unions. Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward, and we're doing so at as quick a pace as this island has ever seen. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the member is suggesting. Does she want an A-B model where only half the students are in school at a time? Or is he suggesting that, we double the staff at our schools? I would be really interested in what her solution is, because we're investing a lot of money here.
From Charlottetown, Victoria
Thank you,
Park.
Mr. Speaker. I want class sizes addressed is what I want. And if we identify something as a priority, that means we work on it. We had an opportunity and we didn't take it. Large class sizes are causing even more havoc than usual this year. In one case, we have upwards of 24 students jammed in a French immersion grade 1-2 class split. A French immersion class. Social distancing is impossible with class sizes well over 20 to a room. I've heard more than once I can't make a grade 1 student sit at their desk all day with a mask on. We had a golden opportunity presented us to lower class sizes, and the minister chose not to take it. This is wreaking havoc on our students' learning, which I will get into later, and their mental and maybe even physical health. Question to the minister, we knew this was coming. We talked about it endlessly. The minister identified it even just now as a priority to lower our class sizes, yet did nothing about it. Minister, what are you going to do about addressing class sizes now?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I'm really proud of the work that the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning, the Public Schools Branch, the Commission Scolaire de Langue Française, the unions, CUPE, PEITF, and really all the teachers, the EAs, the admin, staff, and the support workers, everyone has done with this pandemic. And in fact, I think, if there are issues in some schools, we are working to address those. Yes, some schools, I've gone out and I've talked to a lot of teachers, and, there are cases where you can't physically distance the desk, and that's true. I've never heard of a grade 1 student that's had to keep a mask on for 6 hours a day. That's definitely not direction we've given. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to improve. That's the great thing about teachers. They're innovative, and we're listening to this feedback, and just watch what comes next. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, a short while ago, the CEO of Health PEI commented on the backlog of PEI surgical cases as a result of the shutdown of services over the spring and summer. According to her numbers, only 57% of cancelled surgeries have taken place. This leaves 43% of surgeries that were delayed, cancelled, or still deferred. That's a lot of people who went without surgeries that were deemed medically necessary months ago. As the second wave is underway across the country, what plans does the Minister of Health have now in the event of further shutdowns are required in acute care over the next several months, and what Islander procedures will be delayed further?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I recently met with Dr. Scott Witherspoon, who, as the honourable member would know, is part of the lead of the surgical team. And the facts that he's provided me with is we're at 72% completed. So we're very far ahead compared to the figures that this honourable member seems to be putting forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Larry-Inverness, your first supplementary.
I'm just commenting on the CEO of Health PEI, Mr. Speaker. The healthcare system must be there to address the needs of Islanders and their emergency care requirements. These shutdowns, cancellations and delays reveal a minister who does not have a backup plan. We have seen this with the shutdowns of additions to Unit 9 and barely a dent in the backlog. Even at 72%, that means still there's 38% that haven't gotten their surgeries done, Mr. Speaker. 28%. Mr. Speaker, the people of this province need the confidence of knowing that the system will be there for them. That's the minister's role, Mr. Speaker, in seeing that health care is delivered to Islanders no matter what the health care situations are out there or situations that might occur beyond our control. What steps is the minister taking today to develop a comprehensive plan in the event of a serious second wave?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the comprehensive plan that we have is working with the healthcare professionals who do this tremendous work. Mr. Speaker, it has been a struggle during COVID, not only for our healthcare providers, but also for Islanders. Mr. Speaker, we actually had 46 patients that declined multiple dates for surgery because they didn't want to go into a hospital for fear of COVID, even though we have not had any COVID in our hospitals. Mr. Speaker, we've had Islanders that have declined surgeries because they would prefer to wait until the winter time to have their surgery done, Mr. Speaker, because they wanted to be able to be active during the summer or the fall. So, Mr. Speaker, we have tremendous leadership in our surgical department here in PEI, and Mr. Speaker, I applaud the tremendous work that they've done. As I've said many times before, we hired a new orthopedic surgeon, and he is just going breakneck speed as well to get people through and to get the surgeries that are required. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Larry-Inverness, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it is the role of the Minister of Health to make sure that Islanders are getting good health care services delivered to them. It means that they shouldn't have to be postponed, delayed, to deal with their diagnosis to be more serious as time goes on. And like I say, we're also seeing issues that are getting more severe and concerning across the country, so we need to get some of these surgeries done right away, Mr. Speaker. This is an invisible minister. It's his role to deal with all the health care professionals to make sure that Islanders are represented. It's not clear to me that there's any plan put in place to deal with this. The minister must be, I keep saying he must be awfully good at the game whack-a-mole, Mr. Speaker. He deals with one issue, knocks it down, another one pops up right afterwards. He's shuffling the health care deck, and mental health care has suffered, and dementia pensions have also suffered. Will the minister commit now to not shutting down large elements of our health care system should a second wave occur, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can say one thing. You know, I'm extremely proud of addressing the issues as they come forward, as compared to a previous Minister of Health who didn't even want to be in that chair or that position. It's common knowledge. Mr. Speaker, again, Mr. Speaker, I applaud the healthcare professionals that we have working here on PEI and the tremendous work that they're doing. As I said before, we have 72% of the surgeries that were delayed because of COVID. We're getting caught up, and we're getting caught up very quickly. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know from last week, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Health is failing in his efforts to rectify his latest mistakes in mental health, which is creating complications for another vulnerable sector of society, seniors in long-term care. Mr. Speaker, his choices have had adverse effect on staff, patients, and families alike, especially those struggling with dementia. Over the past 8 months, Mr. Speaker, we know that many people have suffered in long-term care. Many families have suffered. Many people have been not willing or not gaining that last goodbye to those people that we have said goodbye to, Mr. Speaker, during COVID. But, Mr. Speaker, what we're seeing now is we're seeing dementia patients moved into other units. And because of Unit 9, with only 6 beds remaining, they're being moved into other units. These units are not prepared for these patients. The staff is not prepared for these patients, and certainly the families are not prepared. How many units are outside of Unit 9 at the hospital that are either long-term care or dementia patients?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, currently there are 78 Islanders in hospital, whether it's at the QEH, KCMH, Surrey, PCH, Western, that are awaiting long-term care beds. And many of those people are being assessed whether or not that is actually the best track for them. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we're looking at is home care first, to see if any of these individuals could be supported at home versus going into long-term care with the appropriate supports. Mr. Speaker, currently, as of this morning, there was five individuals that were assessed needing designated dementia care beds in Unit 9. There was one person moved earlier today to the Prince Edward home, so that left 4. There was 2 individuals that were on Unit 9 previously when it was being used for dementia. For dementia care patients. Mr. Speaker, they were moved to various other units, one in Unit 3, one in Unit 8, because of their medical condition, not because of dementia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbank, your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that was a favourable answer, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister, but I guess what the point I'm getting to, Mr. Speaker, is we've had this crisis for 8 months. We've got a protest happening outside here tonight on mental health. Now we're seeing the fallout from a decision that was made abruptly in our system that's starting to affect families that have been through pure, you know what, Mr. Speaker, over the past 8 months with their family in long-term care. Now we're starting to see families with people with, major health issues, Mr. Speaker, and we're starting to see the fallout from the staff. And the Minister gets up every day and thanks the staff, and he should. Every Islander should. They're doing a tremendous job. But they can't be put in positions to do things that they're not prepared to do and their units are not set up to do, Mr. Speaker. How can you justify putting families and patients in those positions, Minister, in a time that we've had to prepare for this?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, as I stated, there was 2 individuals that have been assessed requiring designated dementia care beds. They were previously in Unit 9. Mr. Speaker, it was deemed necessary to move them to medical units because of their underlying medical issues. Mr. Speaker, that was done. They're getting the absolute best medical care that they can receive here on PEI. And again, as the Honourable Member said, I get up every time to thank the healthcare workers. And it's important because those people are at the front line and they are doing tremendous work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbank, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when we were in government, we put forth 100 long-term care beds. It wasn't enough. I argued it wasn't enough. We had a plan for 50 more. We have seen in your guys' platform that you were going to increase long-term care beds. You've had 18 months to do it. You haven't done a thing. You haven't even mentioned it. We've seen the promises, Mr. Speaker. It's time for this government to stand up because now what we're seeing is we're starting to see things are starting to build. COVID has put a lens on these things and things are starting to exemplify very quickly. Question to the Minister. How will you immediately work to alleviate the pressures of our mental health and long-term care systems that are building up due to your actions and your inactions?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, you know, I always give credit where credit is due, and the previous administration did make an announcement of 100 long-term care beds. But Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, 42 of those beds are sitting empty because the appropriate staffing cannot be hired because they're not available to open those beds. Mr. Speaker, we recently put out an RFP for an additional very, very much needed long-term care beds, 12 beds in West Prince. Mr. Speaker, I'm meeting with one of the private long-term care facilities tomorrow to talk about a new approach, a new service that could be available. Mr. Speaker, we're also working with the Private Long-Term Care Association overall to see if there's a way to reassign, redeploy beds, to see if there's capacity within existing facilities to be able to open more beds. So, Mr. Speaker, there's much work being done. Is there more to be done? Yes, there's more to be done. And I'm pushing my department daily to make those things happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Many people are struggling with mental health care issues, and particularly among minority populations and newcomers. The lack of planning and supports are disappointing, and that disappointment is shared by many people in these communities. Question to the Minister. Has the Minister done anything to address the unique needs of these communities, these families, these individuals, and these islanders?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we've been working on, not just within health, but across government, is we're working closely with the Department of Education. We hear it all the time across PEI. We can't get access to school gymnasiums on the weekends and the evenings. So, Mr. Speaker, that's one initiative that we're working on to make those more readily available. We only have to look at the French schools here on PEI and what a community hub they are, and they're so essential within that. So, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Minister of Education is fully behind this, and we want to move that initiative forward. Mr. Speaker, we have done a great amount of work with regards to grants as well for sporting organizations. The federal government stepped up to the plate and gave us additional funding this year. We got that out to the sporting organizations. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a great amount of work being done. But the honourable member, if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, I would love to hear them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Well, I do have a lot of ideas, and wellness is one of them, but right now we're talking about race and culture. You look at the social determinants of health, and both race and culture are on that list as risk factors. Here's my second question to the Minister. Earlier this year, the government promised to begin addressing the unique needs of Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. Months after, thousands of people came together and marched in Charlottetown in unity. We have seen no tangible progress. Instead, there's a pattern of neglect and silence. Mr. Speaker, silence is not an answer. We have much work to be done. In your position to address the needs of marginalized communities, what have you been doing, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I previously said, I'm working closely with the Minister of Education to make more resources more readily available. I know at caucus and at Cabinet we have many discussions with regards to how we can better support Islanders, every Islander, all Islanders, and Mr. Speaker, we will continue to do that great work. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure there was a very good answer there on this important issue. And we talk about mental health care, we talk about minorities, we talk about visible minorities. Not enough is being done by this government. Question to the Minister. Why did the Minister opt for a plan that neglects so many people when it came to access to mental health care in these communities?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, we didn't decrease what we had, what we were offering. Mr. Speaker, I'll state it again. During COVID, we introduced a new mental health and addictions line. We had a children's COVID-19 workbook that was created. There was a new phone-based child and youth mental health clinic initiated. Psychiatric urgent care clinics were established. Mr. Speaker, Lennon House received additional funding. Mr. Speaker, as we've stated before, Lacey House and structured housing, the construction of those projects are going to start within weeks. Mr. Speaker, there's 2 new psychiatrists coming to PEI in early 2021, one of which will be dedicated to Unit 9. So, Mr. Speaker, there's many initiatives moving forward, and we are here to support all Islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of news lately about promising vaccines for COVID-19. Hopefully only a matter of months away. And I think that would be welcome news for pretty near everyone. But I say pretty near everyone because there's some reluctance among people out there for to take a vaccine. I met questions to the Minister of Health. Minister, does your department and the Public Health Office have any concerns there may be a reluctance from some Islanders to get vaccinated for COVID-19?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we're particularly proud of here on PEI is the very high percentage of Islanders that do take immunization and vaccinations very serious. We have the highest percentage in all of Canada, Mr. Speaker. PEI is the only province in Canada that can actually track who is vaccinated and who is not vaccinated. So, you know, you're right. There are some individuals out there that are fearful of vaccinations. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, I think it's through communication, it's through education that we need to ensure that those individuals that require a vaccination will get a vaccination. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Montreal-Kilmore, your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the issue is that, and I know the minister mentioned the high rates of vaccination among Islanders for other diseases, but there's a huge push on social media, kind of a disinformation campaign, really, to you know, telling people they shouldn't take this vaccine. And you know, the scary thing is that a certain amount of the population needs to get the vaccine in order for it to be effective. If only 50 or 60% of the population get the vaccine, it's really useless. So I guess, Minister, my question is do you know, does the Public Health Office know what percentage of the population would need to be vaccinated in order for it to be effective?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our ultimate goal would be 100% to be vaccinated. Mr. Speaker, as Dr. Heather Morrison has stated publicly, there will be vaccines coming probably, hopefully, in the first quarter of 2021. And Mr. Speaker, there will be certain protocols laid out depending upon the availability and the quantity of the vaccine coming in, as far as protocols and the most vulnerable to be vaccinated first. But Mr. Speaker, again, it's through education, it's through communication that we need to ensure that people are vaccinated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Montreal-Kilmore, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the member from Summerside-Wilmot had mentioned earlier about kind of an economic recovery plan. Well, a good part of that plan would be to make sure that all Islanders get vaccinated for COVID-19, and then we can really lift the public health restrictions and open up and get our economy back on track. My question to the minister is, what steps are you going to take, the Chief Public Health Office going to take to work against this this campaign on social media against a vaccine to ensure that Islanders are going to get vaccinated? I'm not sure if this would have to come in the form of a mandatory vaccine or whatnot, but I think government has to do something to push back against this fear of vaccination so that eventually Islanders can resume their normal lives.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I honestly have to say I haven't really heard any pushback. The comments that I've been hearing is people are asking for, looking for the vaccine. They can't wait to be able to access the vaccine. Mr. Speaker, admittedly, I do not spend a lot of time on Facebook, on social media. It's probably contributed to my well-being to a certain extent. But Mr. Speaker, again, I honestly, and I suggest everyone follow that. Mr. Speaker, again, I along with the CPHO office, along with government communications, we will be doing a targeted marketing campaign to ensure Islanders know that a vaccination is required, it's safe, and it's for their health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health has said he's put his foot on the gas pedal to get shovels in the ground for the main hospital at the new mental health campus, but that it will still take at least 3 years to get this done. It's been over a year and a half since this government promised shovels in the ground on this hospital build, and planning was underway years before that under the previous government. The current Hillsborough Hospital is outdated and dangerous in its design. Question to the Minister of Health: why do Islanders have to wait 3 years or more for this essential hospital to be built?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to correct one of the points that was just made, where the honourable member says there was a lot of work previously done on this file. There was no work done on this file. Mr. Speaker, there was an announcement, and then there was a walkaway. Mr. Speaker, things admittedly slowed down during COVID. We all know that. We've experienced that. Mr. Speaker, we worked with the City of Charlottetown for the rezoning of the property. Mr. Speaker, we then had to go through a wait period for an appeal process. Mr. Speaker, the design work is being done. on the replacement for the Hillsborough Hospital. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, shovels will be in the ground within the next couple of weeks with regards to Lacey House and structured housing. So, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, Mr. Speaker, I think there's a tremendous amount of work being done, but it's not just about a hospital. Mr. Speaker, we don't want people being hospitalized. We want to be able to treat them closer to home in their communities before they get to the point where they need to be hospitalized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke, your final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right, so potato on who didn't and didn't do the work. But the main issue here is that the plans are not yet complete. Last week, when I asked the minister about the number of staff on the master planning team for the new mental health campus, and particularly the new hospital build, I asked him twice, he failed to respond. It's my understanding that there may be as little as 3 people working on this $150 million project that would undoubtedly save countless lives. Mr. Speaker, doing this right requires an enormous amount of work, careful coordination between units and areas of specialization that will be housed in this hospital. Work that 3 people, regardless of their expertise, simply cannot accomplish alone in a timely manner. Question to the Minister of Health: why have you failed to provide the master planning team with the staff and resources it needs to be able to finally move forward on the main mental health hospital build? Why must Islanders be forced to wait 3 years?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So she has a list of 3 people. I have a list of probably 100 people that are working on this.
He doesn't talk to enough people.
Mr. Speaker, we have several committees comprised of healthcare professionals, whether it's from Canadian Mental Health Association, whether it's from policing agencies here in PEI, whether it's from Justice Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we have experts from TIE working on this file. Mr. Speaker, we have brought the experts together and we are doing the work that needs to be done to design a net zero, state-of-the-art hospital to replace Hillsborough Hospital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The term restorative justice is becoming more and more common. It is an approach to justice that focuses on harms caused by crime, and more importantly, how it impacts people, Islanders, Mr. Speaker. Every year during the 3rd week of November, we recognize it as Restorative Justice Week. In Prince Edward Island, we are developing a program dedicated to restorative justice to build on the principles already very much present in our justice programs and services. Accountability is the fundamental part of restorative justice, and it takes a victim-first approach. The principles of this practice look at heal and repair. Through meaningful dialogue, it allows victims' voices to truly be heard, and it allows offenders to be better understood in consequences of their action. The holistic approach of restorative justice gives way to healing and a path forward for all involved. Restorative justice not only creates a better understanding that crime affects people, but also captures the direct and rippling effect crimes have on our relationships and communities as whole. Every member of this House knows that when something happens in one community, we feel it right across the province, because Islanders are tied together very closely. Because those close ties, the harms of crime hurt us deeply. For this reason, and many others, the province is looking at ways to improve the use and understanding of restorative justice practices in our programs and services, and within our justice system as well. Recognizing the need for a joint effort between the Crown's Office, court services, corrections, and others, together they are working to enhance the use of restorative justice. This consensus coupled with the Indigenous Justice Program that the Mi'kmaq Confederacy delivers to all Indigenous people in Prince Edward Island, is an excellent step forward in moving the dial on restorative justice in our province. Through the program the Confederacy offers, we already see many outcomes that can help reduce crime and victimization. With the support and effects of so many within my department and the community together, I am incredibly optimistic that this time next year, I'll be speaking to the early success of PEI's own dedicated restorative justice program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the House and perhaps request you, Mr. Speaker, to remind the House that it is the respectful form of address from members of the House during debate is as honourable member or the name of the riding, not in as he or she or by name. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, honourable member, I'll review the answer and I'll come back with a response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Responding to the minister's statements is the honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's timely that this ministerial statement comes out today, because just today I was contacted by someone who in the past has had bad run-ins with the law as a result of an addictions issue that they had. And they've built up a whole lot of fines over the years and are now finding it difficult. They've turned over a new leaf, been sober for a long time, but they just can't get on their feet because all these fines lay over their head. And restorative justice, it offers a path for all involved. True justice leaves those directly involved in the crime feeling as if it's been served. Victims, offenders, and the community at large must feel that their needs to heal and carry on have been met. Restorative justice seeks to address this need. It, of course, will not always be the solution, but it's so very important to acknowledge what's required to offer truer healing after a crime beyond a judicial decision of guilt and sentencing. Victims that continue to feel victimized, offenders who are placed back in the same situations that led to a crime, these are the kinds of situations that restorative justice seeks to address. Making amends and the reintegration into society of both parties is the goal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am happy to rise today to acknowledge Restorative Justice Week here in PEI and across Canada. Mr. Speaker, we know our justice system is not perfect. We try our best. There are always and will always be challenges. Restorative justice is founded on a vision of justice that heals and restores. It is based on an understanding that crime is a violent violation of people and relationships, and that justice is served when those most directly involved in an offense are given the opportunity to redress the harms caused. Mr. Speaker, we must do more to ensure that our society and our justice system is built upon the principles of restorative justice. Studies show that penalization is not nearly as effective as rehabilitation in mitigating and reducing repeat offenses in society. I was incredibly excited to see this week the steps that Mount St. Vincent's has taken in Nova Scotia regarding this file. Let's all stand up and ensure that our province is focused on rehabilitation, restorative justice, and building a more inclusive province for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are making strategic investments to create a sustainable future for our island. We recently announced our plans to reach net zero by 2040. This past summer, we committed to funding to the Skinner's Pond transmission line to help further wind development across Prince Edward Island. Recently, we received word from the Municipal Council in Eastern Kings rejecting our wind farm project. We met all the obligations set out to us by the municipality, including proper permits, and consulted with many who supported this project in the area. Now, continuing through the proper channels, we are appealing this decision. This appeal is to preserve our ability to continue with the project, but before we proceed, we are asking islanders to share their thoughts on wind expansion and this project. Do you want us to continue to make investments in renewable energy on PEI? Our goal is to produce energy here in PEI, keeping money and jobs in our community. Investing in wind energy is part of our bigger plan, one that will create a sustainable future for our island. We're asking that Islanders share their thoughts by emailing sustainable@gov.pe.ca. We believe this wind project will open the door to further development that is an important step to meeting our goals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess I would just like to speak on behalf of some communities that have these wind turbines going out. There's no advantage to the community was the reason given for the refusal of the permit for this most recent development. And I think if the minister just sat down and decided to share a little bit more with those communities, maybe they'd see more advantage in these wind turbine projects going up in their communities. So I really urge the minister to have a look at that. It's not an either-or decision. It's not do you want renewables or don't you. It's how we do it is the important thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do commend the minister understanding a lot of the challenges that can be faced in trying to, get towards renewable energy and developing these projects in communities. As an MLA for O'Leary Inverness, I'm keenly aware of the challenges that are out there because the largest wind farm in PEI is in my riding. And although it was actually forced upon the community in some ways in the past, I'm hopeful that there will be ways that we can be more collaborative and work with the communities. When a municipality decides it doesn't want a particular project or whatever, I think you have to respect those wishes and try to see if you can come up with some solutions or other locations. And I know the Skinner's Pond area is very keen to try to get wind energy developed. And one of the things that governments need to be very sure they're doing, they're not sort of forcing these things. So one of the issues that I was confronted with as an MLA when I just became an MLA was the Howland Road issue, where government just forced the line, put it right down the middle of a community, and didn't give the community any say or information on doing that. I would hope that that wouldn't happen. And I also hope that the opportunity of a project the size of $40 million that's mostly supported by the federal government, but the province has money into it too, that they will address some of those challenges that were in the past. And I think that will go a long way to encourage more communities to be supportive of renewable energy projects, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Okay, tabling of documents. Oh, I jumped ahead. Presenting and receiving petitions. Mr. Clerk, no wonder he reminded me.
Mr. Speaker and members of the Legislative Assembly, in accordance with the rules of the Legislative Assembly concerning petitions, I wish to advise that a petition has been presented at the table from the United Church of Canada praying for a private bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the United Church of Canada Act. I wish to advise that the petition as presented is in proper form with respect to form and content, and that a draft bill will be prepared in anticipation of first reading.
Shall it carry? Is there any more petitions? Tabling of documents. Reports by committees. The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules, Regulations, Private Bills and Privileges, and following the receipt of a report on motion number 71, motions respecting virtual hybrid proceedings of the said committee on Friday, November 13th, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot, that the report of the committee be adopted. Your committee... Oh.
Carry?
Okay.
Continue? Sorry. It's carried.
That's okay.
No, you can speak to the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may read the main recommendations of the report into the record. The report was tabled, which allowed members the opportunity to review those recommendations. But for to ensure that those recommendations are in the report, then I will add those in now and then allow for, obviously, if there's anybody from the legislature, from the members who would choose to speak to this prior to us completing the report. Mr. Speaker, your committee has spent many hours on deliberations on this matter, and there's been a huge amount of work done behind the scenes. I would like to particularly to thank the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia for the assistance in providing that they provided based on their experience with virtual hybrid proceedings this summer. There's only BC, Manitoba, and obviously the House of Commons who have currently done work on hybrid proceedings. So it was very helpful to have their assistance and guidance. On the technical side, staff from IT Shared Services and the Manager of Broadcast Services for the Legislative Assembly assisted the committee with its work to determine a video conferencing system that would meet the Legislative Assembly for broadcasting House proceedings in a virtual setting. Thank you to those staff that assisted the committee, and of course, as always, to Clerk Emily Durand for her yeoman's work on, or yeowoman's work on that has to be done in the background in preparing a report of this complexity. Some key considerations, Mr. Speaker, is that as your committee continued its work on virtual hybrid proceedings, we determined that these changes and guidelines should apply to both the House proceedings and committee proceedings. The original motion referred only to House proceedings, but your committee felt it was important to draft rule changes and guidelines that would also allow for committees to meet virtually if it is determined that it is impossible to meet in person. And Mr. Speaker, that leads me to the primary recommendations regarding hybrid proceedings, in that your committee recommends that the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island will exhaust all efforts to allow for in-person proceedings before invoking any provisions for virtual hybrid proceedings. It recommends that the following be added to the rules of the Legislative Assembly as Chapter 22, Virtual Hybrid Proceedings, and that the current Chapter 22 and all subsequent chapters be renumbered. And the key recommendations on how this may be invoked come under virtual hybrid proceedings, that in urgent or extraordinary circumstances, the requirements for virtual hybrid proceedings for House and committee meetings may be invoked at the discretion of the Speaker. That there are additional rules that will be observed during virtual hybrid proceedings, which include the allowance for members to participate in proceedings either in person or by video conferencing. That members who participate remotely are counted for the purpose of quorum. That any reference in the rules for members to rise or be in their place, as well as reference to the chair, the table, or the chamber, would need to be reinterpreted appropriate to the new sitting. And that during ordinary daily routine, members may table documents electronically, provided they are received prior to being referred to the House. And that the transmission of a document by the clerk to all members by electronic means constitutes, for all purposes, a distribution of a document, whether or not the member receives it. That during the committee of the whole House in virtual hybrid proceedings, the chair may preside from the Speaker's chair. A stranger may be admitted to participate by video conference in the committee of the whole House. And again, that a document can be transmitted to members electronically. That in the event of recorded divisions in a virtual hybrid House proceeding, the Speaker will still direct the Sergeant-at-Arms to call on all members, and after no more than 5 minutes, there will be a roll call, with the beginning of a roll call of any members present in the chamber, and then a roll call of those who are participating virtually. Members will need to state verbally a yea or a nay on the vote, and the Speaker will then announce the results. In the event of any technical issues, Mr. Speaker, you shall have the power to take all necessary steps to ensure the integrity of the voting process. In addition to the regular rules for committees, is during meetings of standing and special committees, members again may participate in person or by video conference. Witnesses will participate remotely, and the public proceedings shall be made available to the public via the website. In-camera proceedings will still be conducted as they are now, but need to take into account that there are potential risks to confidentiality inherent in meeting with remote participants. These changes will become effective as of January 1, 2021, and this chapter will be referred to the Committee for Annual Review. So it will remain in place and be able to be invoked at any time with an annual review. And part of the annual review, Mr. Speaker, is to allow for changes, including changes in technology. We have written, based on the conversation and the input, that we recommend that when virtual hybrid proceedings are invoked, that additional guidelines which have been prepared and been attached as an appendix to the report that was presented would also be implemented. Your committee is recommending that the Zoom platform be utilised as the video conferencing platform for virtual hybrid proceedings, of the House and committee meetings, and that all necessary design features be implemented by ITSS at the direction of the Office of the Legislative Assembly. And Mr. Speaker, those will need to be in place for January 1 in the event that we would need to invoke this, that everything would be ready for members to participate. For further clarity, your committee will recommend that any additional operational changes that may be required for virtual hybrid proceedings would be implemented by the Office of the Clerk. Mr. Speaker, the report that was tabled included explanatory notes that further describe the recommendations as well as the guidelines. Your committee felt it was important to include a working document that would assist all members and staff to ensure that virtual hybrid proceedings would be successful. As stated in the conclusion of this report, your committee is pleased to present an alternative method of meeting to this Assembly if it becomes impossible to meet in person due to the COVID-19 pandemic or for any other unforeseen circumstance that may arise. For additional clarity, the provisions to allow for virtual hybrid proceedings, as I mentioned, will be effective as of January 1 and require a confirmation of the vote in the House to be implemented for that date. Your committee would like to reiterate that the primary goal for House and committee meetings should be to meet in person whenever possible, and that these options remain as an alternative only when necessary.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the report? No? I guess we already carried it, so.
Yeah.
So I guess there's no need of carrying it again. Is there any more committee reports? Introduction of government bills. The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Education Act, and I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 72, an act to amend the Education Act number 2, read a first time.
Overview, Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, this legislation would establish the composition, quorum, and term of office of the Teacher Certification and Standards Board. The bill repeals and replaces transitional provisions respecting teachers' licensing to recognize that different classes and categories of licenses issued under or pursuant to the former Act be deemed a valid license of an equivalent category, class, and qualification level under the current legislation. And the bill establishes that any regulations made with respect to categories or classes and qualification levels of teachers' licenses be retroactive to the proclamation of the Act.
No more bills. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to introduce a bill to be entitled Health and Dental Services Cost Assistance Act. And I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Bill number 73, Health and Dental Services Cost Act, read a first time.
Overview, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Essentially, the Health and Dental Services Cost Assistance Act establishes the legislative framework to facilitate implementation of the new Health and Dental Services Program, under which government will be the payer of last resort.
No more bills. Government motions. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, that the 23rd order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Order 23, an act to amend the Regulated Health Professions Act number 2, Bill number 70, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
An act to amend the Regulated Health Professions Act number 2, Bill number 70, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the committee of the whole, please.
Get somebody coming to the floor too? You bringing someone in the floor? Okay. The House is now in Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the bill to be intituled an act to amend the Regulated Health Professions Act Number 2. A request has been made for a stranger to come onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard?
Nicola Hewitt, Solicitor and Legislative Specialist with the Department of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much. And Minister, would you like to commence with a brief statement on the intent of the bill?
Thank you, Chair. So essentially, it's a little bit of housekeeping and a little bit of tidying up the present act as it stands, mostly relates to council members and the college.
Honourable members, is it your pleasure that the bill be read clause by clause, section by section, or open it up as a whole? Thank you. Okay, I'll now start taking names for potential questions. Leader of the third party.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Minister, for this bill. And I'm going to go right to the last section of the bill. And it's section 16 and 2.1, notwithstanding subsection, Minister may issue a directive to a college representing administrative or procedural matters without conducting an inquiry. And the reason why I bring that forward is I have a college in my district that does health courses, and I know I had a briefing on this, but I need to bring it up because I feel there needs to be some more clarity. When the students go there, they know they have to go to province to write a test, and they have to go to the mainland. They have to produce a passport. So they're more or less, I mean, I'll say it, but they feel they're being treated like international students when they're from PEI. I know they need some form of identification, and I know that it's not done by this jurisdiction, it's done by a company that does it. I guess my question to the minister is, could you not look at this, or could you not change this administrative policy in some way that helps our nurses, LPNs and RNs to write this exam? I understand if they go to an English institution, they don't have to write the English proficiency exam, but if they go to a French college, such as Collège de Lille, they have to. So could there not be some remuneration or assistance for these people when they go out of province? Or could there not be something put in place that these people could write the test here? My understanding it's $300 to write the test. You have to apply to write it. It could be a couple of months before you write it. I understand COVID could have a situation with some of this, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, or I'm asking the minister, is there any way that this could be looked at to make it easier for these individuals to get their accreditation to work here on PEI? And I also understand they have to write the national test to write anywhere in Canada, work anywhere in Canada, but to work here on PEI, they have to have this English proficiency test.
Sure.
Out of that college.
Sure. Thanks, Honourable Member. I'll make a couple of comments, and I think Nicola wants to provide some insight on this as well. First and foremost, I appreciate you bringing your concerns forward, and I know we've had several discussions around this particular issue, and I, like you, want to ensure that we make it as easy and seamless as possible for anybody going through an education program, particularly when they're coming into the healthcare field, because as we know, as we've talked about for the last 3 days now, we do need to engage more healthcare professionals here in PEI, and the more people we can have entering into the system, the better. I'll certainly offer to have a discussion with them, but at the same time, it's no different than island students that have to go off island to write their MCATs for medical school and so on and so forth. We did do a lot of work behind the scenes early on in COVID, because essentially what it was going to mean is there was upwards, I think, of close to 40 island students. They were going to have to travel to Halifax, and because of the restrictions and the Atlantic bubble wasn't in place at that time, they were going to have to go to Halifax, self-isolate for 2 weeks, write the exam, come back to PEI, after paying for the exam, I might add, come back to PEI and self-isolate for another 2 weeks. It just, it wasn't fathomable. It wasn't, it didn't make any sense, and we worked tirelessly behind the scenes to try to see if we could get the organization to come here to PEI to conduct the test, but unfortunately, we didn't have any luck on that. I know Nicola has some more discussion. You're fine with that?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I will commit to having more conversation with the college around the implementation of the exam and see if we can make it easier.
Do you have anything else to add, Nicola?
No.
Okay. Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Minister. And I in no way want to disrespect your department or the work that your department does. All I'm asking, and I appreciate that, you know, that people have to be accredited and have to go through this process. All I'm inquiring is there some way that can be looked at that makes the process a little more easier and lessens the financial burden for the individuals? Thank you very much, both of you.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give an example of when self-regulation is appropriate?
Well, the Act has a number of criteria. So for the purpose of regulated health, what we look at is when determining whether we're going to regulate a profession is the risk of harm to the public, the training and education required, their ability to work unsupervised, whether or not there's enough numbers for self-regulation. That's you need a critical mass. If you've only got 5 people in a given profession, and there are some professions like that, they're very small in number here, that may not be sufficient, and I would argue it isn't self-sufficient for self-regulation.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
So this, we are amending the provisions for determining whether it would be in the public's best interest for a health professional to be regulated. So I'm just wondering, why was this necessary?
Go ahead, Nicola.
This has been in here right from the get-go, and it's consistent with all the other provinces, because before you decide to regulate somebody, there would have to be some criteria that you meet, that it is appropriate, that regulation is appropriate. So, you know, you look at, it's all mapped out in Section 75 of the Act. And, you know, what kind of education they've got, what kind of supervision do they have? Are there more appropriate means to regulate the profession other than just under legislation? It could be done through an employment context, for example. Whether they have sufficient members, whether they're a distinct and identifiable profession, what the qualifications and minimum standards of competence may be. You know, so there's a wide range of criteria that are taken into consideration when we determine that. Since I've been in government, I guess there's only one profession that we've said to them that you're too small for self-regulation, and that's midwifery. So that's why they've applied under registered health. And the other one, self-identified as too small for self-regulation, and that was acupuncturists.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Okay, you know, that's very interesting. So just to go on that example then of midwifery, so when you say that would be too small of a profession, how small are we talking? Because I don't know how small that will be.
Well, you'd need a critical mass. So for example, midwives in many provinces, in many instances, there's 2 midwives present at a birth. Mm-hmm. You have to have sufficient midwives available to sit on a council. You would have to have sufficient midwives to sit on an investigation committee and on a hearing committee. So, and as well, if they were going to self-regulate, you would need enough funds generated in the form of fees to run the college, to have the software and the computer hardware and everything else. Because these are established as bodies, the colleges are established as body corporates, and there's costs associated with that. There's legal costs, there's accounting costs, there's operational costs. So if you've only got 10 people, that's going to be, you know, their fees could potentially be quite high. Government does not support these colleges at all. They're all self-supporting under this Act.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So perhaps the minister can clarify for me then, in terms of for midwifery, then how many professionals are we looking at being a part of midwifery here in Prince Edward Island?
Thank you. Thanks, member. The exact number hasn't been determined yet. We're still going through the process with the coordinator that we've engaged from Newfoundland to do that work.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Do we have some timelines on knowing when we can expect to know how many there will be? It sounds like you must have some sort of a sense if you can designate that they wouldn't be able to self-regulate due to their size. So there must be some, you must have some ballpark of what you're looking at.
Well, again, it's going to, a lot will depend on the demand. As I've stated previously in the House, we have roughly 1,400 births a year, I believe, and currently all of those births are more than adequately serviced by our current healthcare professionals here in PEI, but we are committed to bringing in midwifery. Is it happening as quickly as I'd want it? No. I'm the first to admit that. It is taking time. COVID has tremendously impacted that as well, but the Midwifery Association has stated, I think it was back in February, they were in The Guardian on the front page, and they were saying that it's important to do it right. And to take your time and do it right the first time rather than to rush it and not do it right. So we're taking an approach with the guidance from the association, but even more so with the coordinator that we've engaged out of province.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. And it's my understanding the coordinator the province has engaged is a fantastic expert in this area, and we're very lucky to have her working on this. Is that then where we got the sort of ballpark number to make a determination of whether or not this midwifery would be able to self-regulate in Prince Edward Island? Did that come from the coordinator?
Go ahead.
So, a number of years ago, when the Midwifery Association applied for self-regulation, and this is the association themselves, anticipated having 5 midwives on this island. And our response to that was 5 is not sufficient to meet the requirements in this act and to set up a self-regulating college. That, to my mind, is the only number I've ever heard, and that is the number that was put forward by the midwives themselves.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thanks, Chair. So as this continues to develop, and we still don't know, as the minister said, what the demand will be. Perhaps the demand will be very, very high for this service. And it is, I believe the minister has stated, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, that it will be publicly available to all expected mothers who choose to use midwifery as their in their birth process. So, it could be much higher than 5, I would expect, with that, knowing that it will be made publicly available. Perhaps the association at the time did not know whether that was the case or not in anticipating 5. That being said, I'm just wondering at what point then would the midwifery perhaps be able to be would it be reevaluated? Would they have to put in a new application? If we find out there's going to be, 20 midwives working on the island, would that be sufficient? I mean, how does this work?
Go ahead.
So, first of all, when the midwives made the application, they made it on the belief that it was going to be a publicly funded program. That was always their belief. And they thought that 5 was a reasonable number to start with, simply to test the water, so to speak, and just see what kind of uptake. I mean, the last thing you want, first of all, midwives are not easy to come by. So, we'll have to be recruiting them. But I mean, to anticipate coming out of the gate, hiring enough midwives to run in numbers sufficient to run a college, I don't think is a very realistic approach. So, I can't tell you how many it's going to take to self-regulate a college. Every profession's different because of the requirements of the job. If there's 2 of them involved in a birth, then one of them is unable, if there's a discipline matter flowing from it, one of them is unable to sit on either the hearing committee or the investigation committee. So, you know, that's why they chose to come under registered health. They're quite happy to come under registered health. And I think, you know, and as this program rolls out, I think there'll be evaluations done as it rolls out to see what the demand is, because certainly I would expect if there's high demand, there'll be more midwives bought online. I mean, that just makes sense, right?
Yeah. Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So is there currently a list of professions who are being considered for self-regulation then, or any changes that we've made under this as a result of this act?
Yep. So right now I have draft regulations out for lab, x-ray, and respiratory techs. I'm working closely with the counseling therapists and expect to have draft regs out shortly after Christmas for those. We just received an application from the dental hygienists. I have an application in from speech language pathology and audiology. And we have an application in from optometrists. And then we have the 2 in under registered health.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
That's all for now, Chair. Thank you.
You're welcome. Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. Nicola, you just mentioned 6, I think, different groups for whom you're actively developing regulations at the moment. A lot. Yeah. I was surprised.
Oh, and physicians. I forgot physicians as well. I'm doing those.
You preempted my question.
Yeah.
I was wondering whether the physicians are covered with this act, and if so, they are.
They will be. We actually have a bill coming later on this session, the Medical Society Act, which facilitates this whole process. And I expect consultation regulations to be out early in the new year there as well.
Leader of the Opposition.
So just for my own clarity, Nicola, so that they will not be covered under this act, there will be a specific act for...
No. Sorry, I'll explain myself, because we will be coming to it.
The problem here is not you.
The Medical Society is currently established in the Medical Act, and I cannot do that under regulated health. So we're going to establish the Medical Society under its own act. And then, so the Medical Society is the bargaining agent for the doctors. So when we transition the doctors into the RHPA, at the same time, the old Medical Act is repealed and the new Med Society Act comes into place. So that's all the pieces of the puzzle coming together.
Leader of the Opposition.
I've got it. I'm fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? Shall the bill carry? Carried.
I move the title.
An act to amend the Regulated Health Professions Act Number 2. Shall it carry?
Carried. I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carried. Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled an act to amend the Regulated Health Professions Act Number 2, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, that the 16th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 16, an act to repeal the Foreign Resident Corporations Act, Bill number 55, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 55, an act to repeal the Foreign Resident Corporations Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the committee of the whole, please.
Now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled An Act to Repeal the Foreign Resident Corporations Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist for Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to commence with a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill repeals the Foreign Resident Corporations Act. Was for wartime or emergency situation. It allowed foreign corporations to make PEI their head office temporarily. This bill is no longer needed because it is covered by the Business Corporations Act.
Thank you. And I'll read this one. 1, period, the Foreign Resident Corporations Act, R.S.P.E.I. 1988, comma, cap, period, F-13.1, comma, is repealed. Any questions? Shall the bill carry? Carry. Okay. I wanted to read one.
I move the title.
An act to repeal the Foreign Resident Corporations Act. Shall it carry? Carry.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the Chair report the bill agreed to without amendments.
Shall it carry? Carry. The Committee of the Whole House have under consideration a bill to be intituled An Act to Repeal the Foreign Resident Corporations Act. I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carry. That's right.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that the 17th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 17, an act to repeal the Charities Act, Bill number 56, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall that carry?
Carry.
Bill number 56, an act to repeal the Charities Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker to the Chair of the Committee of the Whole, please.
Is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled An Act to Repeal the Charities Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist with Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Minister, would you like to start with a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill repeals the Charities Act from 1955. It was to protect the public from fraudulent charities operating in the province. This act is no longer needed because of federal legislation.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this bill? Still a bill carry. Oh, sorry, Leader of the Opposition.
Quite all right, Chair. Okay. Hi, Blair. I couldn't have you come in twice and not answer a single question. So the Minister mentioned in his comments there that this is no longer needed because we have federal legislation. So is the entire protection from the public from fraudulent charities now, does it all sit federally?
It does. So what we did in '94 is we amended, the legislature amended the Charities Act to say that you didn't have to register with the province if you're registered federally. And once we did that, the business dried up, as it were. No other charities were registered. And we know when there are fraudulent charities, we tend not to pursue them under this legislation. We pursue them under the criminal code for fraud. The fine here is $500, and obviously for fraud under the criminal code, it's much more significant.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. So are there any charities that are registered provincially now or not at all?
Not under this act.
Leader of the Opposition.
So where would they be registered?
They would be registered either federally with Canada Revenue Agency, and if there are fundraising activities taking place, they do need a license under the Lottery Schemes Order, which is an order passed by Cabinet pursuant to the Criminal Code.
Leader of the Opposition.
So all of the protections for islanders, and you know, I used to think that charities were innocuous institutions, but clearly that's not always the case. So the protections that used to exist that this Act would provide, and albeit fairly minor ones, they've all been shifted to the criminal code at the federal level?
The criminal code would capture all of the fraudulent activity. So if there is a complaint about a fraudulent activity, there would be a complaint under the criminal code, an investigation, and a prosecution. The provisions here provided for registration and for certain requirements for bookkeeping, like minutes and accounts and that sort of thing. So I would say that the criminal code is a much more robust protection than the Charities Act ever was for protecting islanders. Yeah.
Leader of the Opposition.
Are there any charities that are registered provincially that would not be registered federally?
There are no charities registered at all under this Act and have not been for some time.
Sure.
Leader of the Opposition.
Sorry, I should have been clear in my question. Are there any charities outside this Act that are registered provincially that may not be registered federally?
Well, there would be no charities registered provincially as a charity under this Act. Are there charities that are not registered under the federal legislation? It's really hard for me to say. There may be some, but there wouldn't be advantages that the Income Tax Act provides for those charities. They wouldn't be registered charities. But those unregistered charities would still be subject to complaints under the Criminal Code for fraud if there was a complaint of fraud.
Leader of the Opposition.
So that's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
If there is a charity that's not registered federally, but some shenanigans are suspected here or uncovered here, the option to prosecute federally still exists even though they're not registered federally.
That's correct.
Okay. Leader of the Opposition.
I'm good, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Shall the bill carry? Shall the bill carry?
I move the title.
An act to repeal the Charities Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor in the province of the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled, an act to repeal the Charities Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed the same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the 15th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Order number 15, Films Act Statutes Repeal Act, Bill number 54, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Bill number 54, Films Act Statutes Repeal Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole, please.
Now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled Films Act Statutes Repeals Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Please state your name and title for Hansard, please.
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist, Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Minister, would you like to start with just a brief statement of the bill's intent?
Sure. My stranger's no longer stranger, but this Film Act regulates the sale, rental, and distribution of films for the use in video cassette recorder, video disc player, and similar devices. This act isn't needed anymore because of streaming services have replaced how people watch movies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this bill? Leader of the Opposition.
So LPs are making a comeback. You know that. So can we be confident that we're not all going to be using our VHS recorders 5 years from now?
That's a very interesting question. I would say most jurisdictions looking across the board will be looking to update their statute book to deal with statutes like this.
Leader of the Opposition.
I'm good, thank you, Chair.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
I move the title.
Films Act, Statutes Repeals Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Thank you, Butter.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House having under consideration the bill to be intituled Films Act, Statutes Repeals Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed the same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall carry.
Sorry.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change that the 25th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 25, an act to amend the Sheriff's Act, Bill number 62, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change that this bill be now read for the second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 62, an act to amend the Sheriff's Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Tignish, Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker to chair the Committee of the Whole, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Sheriff's Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
My name is Claire Henderson. I am the Director of Family Law and Court Services with the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Minister, would you like to start with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment gives the courts the ability to vary or extend when sheriffs will have to force an order in specific limited circumstances. Given what sheriffs faced during the pandemic when it comes to enforcing eviction-related orders and judgments. This amendment will help support the provincial response for future waves of COVID-19 and other emergency situations.
Now the pleasure of the committee that the bill be read clause by clause, section by section, or open it up to general questions. Okay, I'm now taking questions. Summerside South Drive.
Thank you. So is the sheriff permitted to collect personal information from sources other than the ones listed here?
So the sheriff, as a employee of government, is subject to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Personal Privacy Act. And so in relation to the collection of information by the sheriff, they would always be obligated to comply with the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act unless they're acting in accordance with a court order. And so what this particular section allows the court to do, allows the sheriff to do, is to collect information from various sources within government or public bodies to complete the contemplated threat risk assessment. And so, for example, sometimes in relation to the enforcement of writs or judgments, the sheriffs are engaging with individuals who may be interacting with other areas of government. So, for example, probation services, the correctional center, things like that. And in undertaking a threat risk assessment, they would be seeking out information from sources within public bodies about relevant information that may indicate whether or not there may be risk to the sheriff in the execution of the order.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So when you say relevant information, would this include health information, like mental health and addiction information?
So the contemplated amendment relates to the to personal information, not health information. And so you'll note that there is no reference to the Health Information Act. The sources of information that would relate to the risk being contemplated would be personal information relating to the individual in public bodies, not custodians for the purposes of the Health Information Act.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair. So how long would the sheriff hang on to this personal information?
So the personal information that's collected by the sheriff would be retained for the purposes of the threat risk assessment and subject to the retention schedules that are contemplated for the department and the particular section.
Summerside South Drive.
I'm sorry, that wasn't really clear to me. How long would they hang on to it? Depending on which department they were in, they have different rules? Is that what I heard?
No, so it's a little bit of a complex question because some of the information that would be collected would be for the purposes of the court record. The threat risk assessment is engaged and then provided to the registrar of the court, of the PEI Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. And so the retention of information by the court is separate. Court records are not contemplated under the Archives and Records Act or the Freedom of Information and Protection of Personal Privacy Act. And so depending on whether or not the information that's collected becomes part of the threat risk assessment. So the threat risk assessment itself would become part of the sheriff's file, which would technically form part of the court record. But if the information received by the sheriff was not relevant for the purposes of the threat risk assessment, which would form part of the court record, that would be considered a government record, which would be subject to the retention schedule that would be developed for the court services section. And so that retention schedule would indicate how long the information would be maintained in the file.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. That was a detailed answer. So you had mentioned that the Freedom of Information Act would apply to the information the sheriff's gathering here. Is there any other further protections this information has beyond just the Freedom of Information Act?
Well, certainly sheriffs are officers of the court. And so that means that they are subject to some of the legal considerations that officers of the court have for the purposes of engaging with functions in relation to the court. And so, as I said, court records are subject to different considerations than than traditional government information. Remember, the judiciary is a separate branch of government, and access to court records and retention of court records is what we would call a judicial administration issue. And so the sheriffs, in the conduct of their work, are subject to the considerations of the treatment of court records. And so, you know, I can tell you that the privacy of matters before the court is something that, and the confidentiality in terms of information coming from the sheriffs about court matters, is something that any officer of the court takes extremely seriously.
That's good, Chair.
Summerside South Drive. Okay, Cornwall Meadowbank.
I believe my question has been answered too, but I guess what I was thinking about while you were explaining that was to ensure that the individuals and the sheriff's office, based on what's given to them by the court order, there's protection there when dealing with someone who has a mental illness. And I think you've answered that, but can you be just clear that they are aware when they enter a premise or a property that if the individual has a mental illness history or something that has happened in the past, that the sheriff's office has provided that information?
So in terms of the operation of the threat risk assessment, what it contemplates is that it allows the sheriff's office to engage with various public bodies throughout government to get a broad indication of what may be risks and considerations. One of the reasons why this amendment is being forwarded is not just because of the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, the sheriffs, when engaging in their obligations to enforce writs and judgments, they want to do so in a way that's both considerate of officer safety, but also of the safety of the individuals that are involved. Obviously, when we're talking about these types of executions, we're talking about evictions, we're talking about seizures, we're talking about situations that can be potentially volatile. And so the ability of the sheriff to engage in a comprehensive threat risk assessment that's also respectful of the confidential nature of personal health information, this is contemplated because oftentimes the information that's available through public bodies provides a context for the sheriffs that is not there on the face of the order, right? Oftentimes when we're talking about, for example, an eviction under the residential property legislation, the residential tenancy legislation, that's a fairly standard form document, and that is the only document that's provided to the sheriffs. And so this amendment allows them to engage in necessary considerations for planning for the execution of these writs and orders.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
So there's emergency response teams now being formed for the province. So I'm just wondering, are the sheriffs part of that discussion? Do you know?
They're not part of the discussion in relation to the development of that. However, once those teams are up and running, if there's a circumstance, so to give you an example, if there was a threat or a risk that was identified through this assessment that may indicate the necessity of engaging with law enforcement services, for example, which happens from time to time, that discussion with law enforcement would theoretically trigger a response from law enforcement that team could be deployed to those circumstances. The sheriffs, remember, are not policing services for the province. They're court officers that engage in enforcement of court orders and provide court security. And they are excellent, and they engage in consultation with the various policing services and agencies to ensure that appropriate steps are taken.
Thank you. No, I'm fine.
Okay, Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for bringing this forward. So I'm just wondering if you can just kind of go through how the information that's collected is protected.
So the information that's collected would be collected through contacts with various public bodies and departments within government. The same way that the information, so Okay, let me rephrase. So when the sheriffs collect that information, until that information becomes part of the court record, it is subject to the FOIP Act in terms of our obligation to protect personal information and privacy. And so this notwithstanding clause doesn't remove the requirement that once the sheriffs receive the personal information that they're required to protect it. What it does is allow the public body that they're engaging with to provide them that information, which is then, once they receive it, subject to the operation of FOIP, subject to that, you know, the legal corollary that there's court records and judicial direction in relation to the collection of information once it becomes in the court file. But the notwithstanding provision in here doesn't preclude the sheriffs as, in terms of government records being subject to FOIP. That doesn't mean that they can just willy-nilly start throwing around that information. So it's protected in the same way all of the information that's the personal information that's collected by any public body is protected.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my question, I think, is to the minister. So has government requested a privacy impact assessment from the Information and Privacy Commissioner regarding the practice of keeping privacy information?
I'll hand that over to Claire.
I can actually speak to that. We, because this amendment was engaging with the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, we actually engaged with the Access and Privacy Services Office, who is generally the area of government that's consulted to do those types of assessments. So we absolutely consulted with APSO in relation to that, yes.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
And can you tell me what criteria has to be present to determine whether you would go through APSO or if something would be forwarded on to the Information and Privacy Commissioner?
So Section 51 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Personal Privacy Act sets out the criteria for seeking recommendations from the Information and Privacy Commissioner.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, has the department ever gone through an assessment of that type and determined that APSO was not able to, I guess, complete that work and that it would have to be referred to the Information and Privacy Commission?
I wouldn't be in a position to speak to that presently. I don't have that information, but I can tell you that the Access and Privacy Services Office is engaged with regularly in terms of privacy considerations and the assessment of the actions of government and the potential actions of government. And you know, the manager in that office, for example, is contacted with regularity to ensure that there's appropriate considerations when new processes and procedures are being developed, such as this. And so, you know, I can't speak to part of your question, but I can tell you that that is very much an active role that the Access and Privacy Services Office provides to public bodies across government.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
And would it be, based on your knowledge, would that be that's the first stop, would be to go to the Access and Privacy Services Office for advice?
It's certainly one of the stops. Often there are multiple points of engagement in terms of the decisions that public bodies make in relation to the application of the Act.
Mermaid Stratford.
That's great. Thanks, Chair. No further questions.
Shall Bill carry?
Carry.
I move the title.
An act to amend the Sheriff's Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Chair, as Committee of the Whole House having under consideration a bill to be intituled, an act to amend the Sheriff's Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Not bad. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Agriculture and Justice and Public Safety that the ninth order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 9, Forest Fire Protection Act, Bill number 46, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land, Justice and Public Safety, and Attorney General that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 46, Forest Fire Protection Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice, Public Safety, and the Attorney General that this House do now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish, Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole, please.
The House is now in Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled Forest Fire Protection Act. Request has been made for a stranger to come onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
Mike Motney. I'm the Manager of Field Services with Environment, Water and Climate Change.
Thank you very much. And Minister, would you like to commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Joining me today is Mike Motney, who is in charge of the public land management and wildfire suppression for the department. I want to thank Mike and staff, as well as all firefighters across the island and the Fire Marshal's office for all your efforts and commitment to ensuring public safety. The Forest Fire Protection Act allows us to improve service for islanders. It will allow staff to use their resources more efficiently, focusing on public education and prevention. Right now, we issue hundreds of permits a year to folks who are doing hand-piled brush burning. The new act will eliminate this cumbersome permitting process in favor of open or closed days for backyard burning. Industrial burns, however, such as land clearing, will still require special permits. This act also allows government to recoup costs of forest fires caused by carelessness. It increases fines to $100,000 for corporations and $50,000 for individuals. And finally, this act was developed in consultation with our conservation officers and chiefs of our volunteer fire departments. And it certainly aligns with the legislation in other Atlantic provinces. It's about public safety and builds on the great work that the department has done to educate the public on danger of forest fires.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you.
Is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, section by section, or just open for general questions? Okay. O'Leary and Verness.
So for blueberry growers that have to burn on an annual basis or every second year, basically, will this have any impact on them?
It'll be status quo.
O'Leary and Verness.
So they still apply for a permit unless it's within a certain season, like if you're, I think, March, you don't have to, but April, May.
Yeah, during the regulated times for the fire season, blueberry burning would be now called Category 3 fire, and they would just come in and apply the same as they would now.
O'Leary and Verness.
What about for farmers that might be clearing land for, say, burning stumps, same thing, they apply for a permit like they normally would, nothing changes in that regard either?
Correct. They would now, what's now termed an industrial permit would be termed Category 2, and they would have to come into the office and apply for a Category 2 burning permit.
O'Leary Inverness.
Okay, no, I think that as long as there's not major changes that deal with that. My only other one, and it's more to inquire about the West Point Fire Department's forestry truck, and I think it's a 1972 truck. Is there any chance that that's going to be improved by this legislation?
Yeah, certainly, we are constantly doing a mechanical review, and that's on the radar.
O'Leary Inverness.
Thank you.
We have new trucks.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
We have new trucks.
Just curious if there's been, with any of the businesses that this may affect, has there been any discussions about premiums on their insurance policies? Has this going to negatively affect them and their insurance policy is going to be increased?
As a landowner?
Or a business operation?
Not that I'm aware of. We're at a national scale, we are working with other jurisdictions across Canada to sort of embrace what's called Fire Smart. And it's heavily backed by the insurance industry of Canada. And what its goal is to build community resiliency to forest fire. So we're building that into this part of the education of this new act. And the insurance industry of Canada is certainly been in the conversation.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
That's fine, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Leader of the third party.
Thanks, Chair. So if you're a woodlot owner and you want to clean up some debris in the wintertime, do you need a permit, a burn permit in the winter?
Leader of the third party.
What are the dates from the time you don't need one till you need one?
The current act is from March 15th to December 1st. The new act, it's not explicit yet because it's in the regulations and those haven't been developed yet. But
Leader of the third party.
So you said March 15th to December 1st?
Correct, yep.
That's when you can burn some old debris in your woods?
Outside of that window, you do not require a permit.
That's when you do not require a permit.
Leader of the third party.
All right, and my question is, the O'Leary Inverness member asked it, but where's Wellington's fire truck on, the forestry fire truck on your list? Is it number 2 or 1 or 3? Any idea? I think it's pretty old too.
Yeah,
They appreciate it.
We are replacing them one per year. We have one, just the plumbing is being finished right now, and I know where that one's going, but.
You're not going to tell us.
I think it's going east. Just because of, we've triaged for mechanical stuff.
Leader of the third party.
Since you're not going to give us a definite where and when, how many of these trucks is there and how far are we along? Is there 7 trucks and we replaced 4, or is there 12 and we replaced 8?
We have 5 that are stationed across the island. And so far, we've replaced 1 that is in East River. We have another one that is going to be rolled out in the next week or so, and then we have another one that we've already purchased. The chassis is sitting at a dealership in town.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if you could speak to what the typical forest fire seasons are for each county.
What the fire season would be?
What the typical forest fire season is, yes.
It's variable depending on the year. Like this year in particular, it was very dry, so we were busy, and not every year is the same.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. When I was looking at section 15(1), it states that a Forest Service officer may requisition for the duration of a forest fire any vehicle, boat, aircraft, tool, appliance, or any other equipment. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the scope of that power.
That's there. It's rooted in public safety, that if someone's house is to burn down and I need a piece of gear, or a Forest Service officer needs something to help save a life, that gives them the power to do that. And in there also, if we do requisition it, the person will be compensated.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Could you speak to what the expected compensation might be?
It hasn't been developed yet, but by no means do we intend to be unfair to anybody.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. I When I was reviewing this bill, I was wondering if there was any thoughts for education for Category 1 burns, your average household burn, to make sure that it can be done as safely as possible.
Okay. Certainly education is, that's what this is all about for me. The easiest fire to fight is one that doesn't start. And that's where I'd like to see all of the firefighters across the island not be needed. And education is fundamental to what we're trying to accomplish. And if we can get people knowledgeable about how to safely to burn, then I think we've done our job well.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with you. I actually think that there's an opportunity to do online training modules with this as a low-cost, easy thing to roll out that wouldn't require any additional human resources. I'm wondering if that's something that's been considered.
Yeah, we have videos online now.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. And are they part of the process to get a Category 1 permit?
Well, that hasn't been determined yet, but certainly what I'd like to see is that there be when you go to view every day, whether it's an open, closed, or restricted burn day, all those materials that would lead you to further education would be at your fingertips.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I can appreciate that. On Section 18, with the minimum fines being $5,000, I wonder if, I suppose my question is, do you worry if that will disincentivize people from taking legal action for more minor offenses?
I'm not sure I follow that one.
For more minor offenses, for less severe offenses, if you know your neighbor's fine is going to be $5,000, do you think it will prohibit people from wanting to report on smaller concerns?
That's a good question. I don't, I mean, this is all rooted in public safety, and it's supposed to, hopefully if someone's contemplating doing something outside of the windows that we've deemed safe, then the fines are supposed to be sizable enough that it's meaningful.
Somerset Wilmot.
I'm good, thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Mike, how are
Hi.
you?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah.
So I've, and it might be outside the scope of the bill, and if it is, I apologize, but I think it does fit. So I'd like to understand the responsibilities if there's a burn within a municipality that is heavily populated around the area that there's a burn. What obligation is there for public notification so that people realize that it's going to happen?
Okay. So under the current system, we have the landowner is ultimately responsible for all their actions. And outside of any municipality that has bylaws that prohibit the legislation, the legislation holds true. There's nothing explicitly stated in the current legislation that says they must notify everyone. Mm-hmm. It's to be a good corporate citizen. I would take that on as their responsibility, and I think that's implicit in the act to do so.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, because there was recently one within Charlottetown, and my understanding is that it was heavy smoke. It was on a good day where, air systems were running, windows could have been open, and my understanding is the impact was significant, especially if anybody had breathing issues and that kind of thing, and so that's why a constituent who was in the area at the time brought it forward. So I'm wondering, do you know offhand if the city of Charlottetown does have bylaws around like a duty to notify, or would they be under the provincial?
Yeah, so that burn that when you're referring to is actually outside the city limits.
Okay.
And there was a weather anomaly that produced the smoke in the town. everything was legal. It was a legal burn. To your direct question, the City of Charlottetown does have bylaws that supersede the Act that do limit and constrain outdoor burning.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
And that's good to know because I was told, I guess, that it was within city limits, so it was outside. So I guess after it happens, is there any obligation? So for instance, if somebody's home is impacted with smoke coming into their home and it impacts their health, is there any repercussions that those homeowners can take in order to, whether it's, to clear the air in their house or, go through kind of like a service master type cleaning or anything like that?
That would be a civil dispute.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. I know it can often be difficult to determine the origin of a fire, and I'm wondering what sort of burden of proof is required in order to prosecute in a case like this?
So we, in my staff, we focus on on putting the fire out. And there's a clear separation between the enforcement and any fines and actually the act of firefighting. So we have sent folks from Justice and Public Safety away to get training in ignition and understanding about fire sources. And we clearly separate. It's really difficult when you're trying to educate the public and also trying to find them. So we've made that clear separation. And that all the fines reside, and we have a great relationship with Public and Justice, and that's where it resides.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. I know many other places in Canada and around the world are struggling with fires that are initiated through natural causes, if I can put it that way. And it's been a long time since we had major fire here on Prince Edward Island. I'm wondering if there's a sort of ongoing risk assessment in terms of where our forests are and when we might expect to have an issue here, or is that really, are we not in a place where that's a problem?
I would hope, and staff are always on the ready, and all the community brigades are always on the ready. And this past summer was a great example of having conditions right. And we were busy. And there's been multiple times I left in the middle of supper and had to go. And we do it, and we put the fires out. And staff are trained. It takes a while and takes a long time to get competent and capable staff. And I'm proud of them, and they're great. Yeah.
Leader of the Opposition.
I appreciate the answer, and I appreciate the work that you and your staff do to keep us safe. If I understood the Minister's remarks properly at the beginning, we will no longer be issuing individual permits for burns. Is that correct? There will just be a period of time within which it's designated or not designated?
So the act that's here today is it's a shift from our current system. So right now we have a couple different methods. In the act that's on the table here is for anyone that's doing just small backyard cleanup, we will not require them to physically come to an office and fill out and get a permit. Every day they'll be on our government website, during that fire season, they will check to see if there's an open burn day, a restricted burn day, or a closed burn day. It's very clean, very simple. There's no shades of gray. It's helpful for the local fire brigades. It's helpful for the public. It's helpful for our conservation officers. I like it.
Leader of the Opposition.
And so do I. Is there any loss of revenue to the province through not issuing these permits anymore?
The permits were free.
Leader of the Opposition.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
I move the title.
Forest Fire Protection Act shall carry.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor in the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Thanks. Good job.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled Forest Fire Protection Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to the same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that the 22nd order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 22, an act to amend the Highway Traffic Act number 5, Bill number 52, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 52, an act to amend the Highway Traffic Act number 5, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health. This House do now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Give me that to sign.
The House is now in a Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Highway Traffic Act number 5. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
Graham Miner, Director of PEI's Highway Safety Division.
Thank you very much, Minister. Would you like to commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Yeah, there's a few parts to it, but I talked about the other day when I introduced it, the interlock part and how we deal with people who don't use one when prescribed. I guess that's the proper term.
Yes.
And the transit piece, that a yield to allow buses to get back out into the traffic flow that's been asked for by the city in particular. And the third part was, I don't see the third part. The third part had to do with who could train a driver.
Yeah. Who
And the
see
amount
a
of experience.
company driver, and the experience and where the experience comes from.
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, section by section, or just open up to general statements as a whole. Okay, I'm now taking questions.
Sitting there all day.
No questions? Leader of the opposition.
Thank you. I'm interested in the yield to bus provision that was requested by the City of Charlottetown. Just exactly how that would work. You know, I love letting buses stick to their schedule and letting them in out, but how is that going to be policed? You know, is this something that's going to be mandated, or is it just a suggestion to drivers?
I think what will happen with this, or Minister.
Oh, you're the expert.
No. The expectation in the beginning will be a period of education and soft enforcement for quite a while. Transit buses in the city we're talking about schedules and how to maintain their schedules. And as more bus lanes may be developed in the future, and of course there's bicycle lanes, the buses are pulling into those lanes, picking up people, and then wishing to signal and come back out into traffic. So there's only a few locations right now where that occurs, and what they're hoping for is similar compliance that has happened in quite a few Canadian cities from Halifax, Montreal, and so on, where similar laws are in place that seem to have been quite effective, as the majority of the public, once they become aware, they start to allow the buses to come back out into the flow of traffic.
Leader of the Opposition.
I'm good, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Graham.
You're welcome.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
Which one? This me? Okay. I move the title.
An act to amend the Highway Traffic Act number 5. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
And I'm good. Thanks.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled an Act to amend the Highway Traffic Act number 5, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? Honorable members, the hour has been called. We will recess at 7 o'clock this evening. Enjoy your supper.